Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is SmartTCG, and today we're going to be going over my personal tier list heading into the World Championships. So we have tons of decks right here. We're going to start off with that tier 1 that is going to be the best of the best decks. We're going to have, like decks that just have incredible matchup spreads overall. We have the tier 1.5 decks that might be slightly weaker than those, but still have, like a fantastic matchup spread, can definitely go, into any tournament and be successful. We got tier 2 as well. Tier 2 is going to be those decks that are still relatively strong, but might have a couple of flaws to them, which is why they aren't at that tier 1.5 or tier 1. Then we have the tier 3 as well, which is going to be decks that might have some potential, but have lots of flaws to them. Then we have the don't play this tier. Now that's just going to be the tier of decks that I would say if you are trying to be successful in the Pokemon trading card game right now, you might struggle to be successful with, some of the decks in that tier. I'm not saying all the decks are terrible, but I'm just simply saying that I personally would not recommend playing them right now in the standard format. So with that being said, let's get started. So first off, we have here is the Arceus Charizard deck. So the Arceus Charizard deck is going to be the Arceus and Talion version with the Charizard, I believe. This is a very, very strong deck in the format right now. I would say it's a little bit worse than the Arceus and Talion in my opinion, but it still makes a very, very strong deck. Moving on to the Arceus and Talion deck. This is going to be our very first tier 1 deck as of right now. It pretty much can beat anything in the format. It is relatively consistent as well, and also has great comeback potential with the Roxanne Path, with the Sharon's Care. It truly is one of the most powerful decks in the standard format, and there's an argument that it is the best deck in the format. So Arceus and Talion, no doubt, tier 1. Moving on to the other Arceus variant here, we have Arceus V-Star with the Jolteon. Now this is, to my knowledge, going to be just straight Arceus V-Star Jolteon with potentially the Cinccino line. It recently won a regional a couple months ago, but it's kind of fallen off as of right now, as I think Jolteon is not as powerful as it used to be. Still a potentially okay deck. I think it's just a tier 2 deck. It has decent matchups versus some of the Inteleon decks, but it does have some flaws to where it just can't do a ton of damage. It's a little bit more inconsistent compared to the Inteleon builds as well. So I still think it's a decent deck, but tier 2. Our first don't play this, we have Lilligant. Lilligant right now is a deck that just really struggles with, I would say, the consistency. It gets overwhelmed by the majority of the format. So unfortunately, Lilligant is going to be in that don't play tier. We got the Dialga V-Star, Origin Form Dialga V-Star here. Origin Form is one of the most powerful decks in the standard format. It does struggle with some consistency issues at times. Sometimes it draws a little bit weird. So we're going to put that into tier 1.5 though, but it's still incredibly powerful, has a relatively decent matchup spread. Being able to use your Star Chronos is absolutely insane, and it can truly beat anything in the format if it can get kind of around those weird draws sometimes, but it's still a really good deck. So we'll put it into tier 1.5. Now we got the two Palkia variants. I wanted to do them both at once. We got the Palkia Mew. This is going to be a tier 2 deck as of right now. I think it's just significantly worse than the Inteleon version, but Palkia is still an incredibly powerful card. It won the Melbourne Regional Championships as well, so still is a pretty strong deck. Going into Palkia and Talion as well, we have Palkia and Talion at the tier 1 as of right now. Incredible deck. I'm actually going to put it over the Arceus right now, but the Palkia and Talion is incredibly powerful, has very, very good matchups across the board. The only thing that holds it back from winning every single tournament is that there are a lot of decks that are trying to counter it. We got, things like the Flying Pikachus, the Duraludons, the Blissies. But the good thing about those decks is that those decks aren't performing exceptionally well right now, which does mean that Palkia is still going a little bit uncontested, you could say, right now in the standard format. Tier 1 deck, absolutely fantastic. Darkrai V-Star. Darkrai V-Star is a tier 3 deck. It has some potential simply because it's just such a it's just a super fast deck, right? You are going to set up every single game. The problem is though is that even when you set up, it just doesn't really do a lot of things that make the deck successful. You don't really have a disruption package. Yes, you're going to one-shot things, but you only have 270 HP, which means that oftentimes you're going to get one-shot right back. Your deck is very weak to Path of the Peak. It's relatively weak to Roxanne Path, Marnie Path. All those things can brick you. And I think that the deck, just right now, the metagame isn't right for it. With that being said, though, if the metagame starts to change, there is a potential that the Darkrai V-Star could be a very powerful deck. Maybe at some point the Palkia decks, which are Darkrai's biggest issue, maybe those fall out of favor and the deck gains a lot more viability. But as of right now, it's just too linear of a deck in the standard format for me to consider it in that tier 2 or, you know, like tier 1.5 or 1 range. Still a deck though that has some untapped potential. It's just that we really haven't been able to find out exactly how to make the deck work. Regigigas. Regigigas is an interesting deck right now. I'm going to put it at tier 2, which might surprise some of you because some people think that this deck is a tier 3 deck or in, you know, almost a don't play this tier. But I think this deck has a lot of potential because there are a lot of Palkia V-Stars that are cutting the Tool Jammer, which means that if you have a choice ball on your Regilucky, you can do 300 damage to knock out. And also, a lot of the Arceus and Talions and just, you know, like the Arceus variants in general are currently cutting their Dunsparce, which means that the Regirock is going to be able to, you know, get those knockouts. You also gain things like the Pokestop as well to help a little bit with that consistency. The problem is though, is that the deck is just super clunky at times and has a lot of issues and can lose matchups that it should never lose simply to slow starts. But if the deck gets sets up, it has a lot of potential and has a relatively decent matchup spread as of right now. Moving on to Arceus Beedrill. Arceus Beedrill, I mean, it's a tier 2 deck. It's relatively okay. It has some decent matchups versus decks that heavily rely on special energy, but those decks that, you know, heavily rely on special energy are losing a lot of popularity as decks like the Palkia V-Stars, the Dialga V-Stars. All those decks don't, you know, like necessarily rely on special energy, which has kind of hurt the viability of the Beedrill right now. So I think it's a bottom tier 2 deck, still a relatively strong deck, but I wouldn't consider it relatively close to even the tier 1.5 range. Blissey is another tier 2 deck, has relatively decent Arceus and Talion matchups and also Palkia matchups, but the rest of the matchup spread is relatively mediocre. It can be very, very slow. It's like inconsistent at times, and it can get overwhelmed by decks very easily. So as of right now, I have it at the tier 2. Still a potentially, you know, like decent deck. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw, you know, like 1 or 2 do exceptionally well at some place like the World Championships. But as of right now, I don't necessarily think the time is, you know, for it right now to be successful. But I still think it is inherently a very, very strong deck, and the matchup spread is still relatively decent. Whimsicott here. Whimsicott's going to just be a don't play this deck right now. What made Whimsicott so special is that when special energies kind of ran the standard format, Whimsicott had a lot of potential. When also decks like Rapid Strike Urshifu, which you hit weakness on, were very, very big, Whimsicott had a lot more potential. As the metagame has kind of shifted to a lot more basic energy centric meta, the deck has really started to fall out of favor. The deck just loses to Palkia. There really isn't a very good strategy to beat that matchup, which is another reason as to why the deck has just completely fallen off a cliff. I would put it in the don't play this tier. It just really doesn't have a lot going for it. Durant here. Durant, unfortunately, is going to be in the don't play this. I would never consider this type of mill deck. I still think that it loses to players that know how to manage their resources, and if they know how to remotely like manage their resources, then the Durant deck is just going to lose almost every single game. So I personally would put it in the don't play this. It also struggles with a lot of consistency issues just because it's gonna, you know, rely on the Snorlax or the Cinccino engine, which means if you don't start one of those cards, then you're gonna really stumble, as it's so, you know, like heavily reliant on those. It can struggle to Marnie as well, and it is a deck where you need to usually get all 4 of those Durant out, and sometimes that can be hard to be able to consistently do. So as of right now, I would put the Durant in the don't play this category. All right, moving on to the next deck, we have Radiant, Charizard, and Talion. Now, this is a really interesting deck right now, which has seen a lot more play recently. I think it's actually a really strong deck in the standard format right now. We got Radiant, Charizard, and Talion here. And I think this deck is really strong. Basically, the strategy of this is to use things like your Shady Lanes and Talions to set up multiple Radiant Charizards. You also have things like the Rowlets and the Bird Keepers to get those early like KOs on Sobbles and stuff like that. One of the things that it kind of struggles with is that consistency. Sometimes the starts can be very, very awkward, but when it gets set up and you're able to streamline that Radiant Charizard over and over and over again with a choice belt, it truly is a very, very powerful deck. I think it's one of the more underrated decks in the format, and I would have it at the top of tier 2 as of right now. Moving on to the Arceus Charizard deck. The Arceus Charizard deck is just kind of mediocre. It can struggle with a lot of consistency sometimes. You do also have to play VMAX, so sometimes the price trades don't necessarily work out all the time. Also, since the Palkia V-Star variants are so popular, Charizard loses a lot of what makes it special, because it's just going to get you like one shot every single time. So as of right now, I don't think it's this time's for this deck to shine, but I do think it has some like potential if like the Palkia V-Star start to lose a lot of popularity in the future. But like as of right now, I would put it in that tier 3. Moving on to Corvonite Arceus, I would put this in the don't play this category right now. I really would not like recommend this. It really just doesn't have anything going for it over, you know, the majority of the other Arceus V-Star based variants. I think it's relatively mediocre. Its power level is not super high and struggles to a lot of the better decks in the standard format right now, like the Arceus and Talions, like the Palkias, like Mew as well. So as of right now, I'd put in don't play this, but I do think that maybe in the future, if people can kind of rework how the deck is, you know, like functions, then it could see some more success. But right now, to put in don't play this. Regigigas Malamar tier 3. I think the deck has, you know, some potential. It obviously has that technically, you know, almost infinite damage cap. You can reach 400 oftentimes, but the problem is that the deck really struggles to, you know, things like Roxanne's, Marnie's on turn 1 or turn 2. Also, since the metagame has turned from a, like at one point, a mainly VMAX based meta to V-Star, getting those big 300 damage knockouts don't feel as good anymore because you have to take 3 of them instead of 2 of them nowadays, which is a big reason why the deck has fallen off. It's just because we have so many, you know, V-Star based cards that have 280 and with a big charm over 300 HP, which just, you know, kind of makes Regigigas Malamar not as special as it used to be. Also, the Arceus and Talion matchup is relatively poor as well because of Sharon's Care, and oftentimes you're not going to be able to hit 310 on something, you know, like the Arceus with a big charm. So like if you miss that, then you're just going to Sharon's Care, wipe all the energy away. So I think this deck is relatively okay. Probably put it at the top of tier 3, but I just don't think that the time for it is right now, simply because we're starting to change to a more 2 prize metagame, which, you know, kind of makes Regigigas Malamar a little less special. All right, moving on to E-Turn. I just would put it in the don't play this. This deck loses the Collapse Stadium, loses the Path, loses the Palkia. This is a relatively mediocre deck right now, unfortunately, because this was a deck that some people thought was going to come back with Dark Patch, but fortunately just was not able to live up to that, and a lot of the flaws of the deck were exposed very, very quickly. And I would say Path is just one of the biggest issues. It's just so weak to that card. So I'm going to put it in the don't play this right now. Moving on to Dragapult and Talion. Dragapult and Talion, once again, I think it's going to be in the don't play this category. I think it's okay. It's just relatively weak in my opinion right now in the standard format. This was a deck in like back in the day where like when, you know, like Pokemon oftentimes had maybe 260, 270, 280 all the time, then it was a significantly more stronger deck. But now, you know, with the majority of decks having, you know, the potential to go over 300 with things like the big charms, the VMAXs have way over 300 sometimes as well. It just kind of lost a lot of the viability that it had, and also just doing 130 just isn't as strong as it used to be, as the power creep has been significant since this card has came out. So as of right now, I'd put it in the don't play this. Moving on to Arceus Duraludon. This is a really interesting deck right now. I think it's a tier 1.5. It's actually almost to the top, simply because it does incredibly well versus the Palkia V-Star variants, which is just what really gives it the strength that it needs to be successful. The Arceus and Talion matchup is relatively hard, but it is a very winnable matchup in my opinion. And if you are, you know, able to beat that, then this deck might even, you know, be in contention for the top 3 or top 4 decks in the standard format. I think it's really, really good right now. Just, you know, having the Skyscraper and also Hyper Potions and Crystal Cave just makes it a very resilient deck right now in the standard format. It can take lots of hits, heal as well. And these, you know, like the Skyscraper ability is one of the hardest things to deal with for a lot of decks in the standard format. Once again, it does very well versus Palkia V-Star, which I think is kind of what makes it special right now in the standard format. Moving on to Flying Pikachu. I would have Flying Pikachu in the tier 2. I don't think it's a tier 1.5 deck. I also don't think it's a tier 1 deck. We saw it win the North American International Championships about a month and a half ago, but I think as time has gone on, its flaws have been exposed. It's kind of inconsistent, kind of weak as well. It doesn't even beat the Palkia deck consistently, and the Arceus and Talion matchup is very, very poor for the deck, which is why I think this deck has kind of fallen out of favor, you know, like over the past couple weeks in the online tournaments. So that's where I think that the deck has just kind of started to fall off. It still is strong. Yes, being able to hit Palkia for, you know, like weakness is very, very nice, but the deck still has a lot of flaws, and it still just overall is kind of a relatively weak deck. I think the deck really preyed upon, you know, people not knowing exactly how to play versus it, and also like the meta game being just so like heavily saturated with Palkia. But now we have a lot of other decks in the format that are, you know, starting to gain lots of popularity, which kind of defeats the purpose a little bit more of Flying Pikachu. So as of right now, it's a tier 2 deck, though still strong, and takes a pretty close Palkia matchup, which is good because there are not a lot of decks that take a really close Palkia matchup, but this does. So all right, moving into the water box here, I would put it in tier 3. It has some potential. It is placed okay. It got top 16 at the Melbourne Regional Championships a few months ago. I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's just a, you know, single prize deck with things like the Corvonite and the Starmie as well, kind of as your main, you know, 2 prize attackers to try and finish off games. It struggles with consistency. Sharon's Care is an issue for the deck because oftentimes you're not able to one-shot, but you do have some things going for it, like the Corvonite to take those big, you know, one-hit KOs. Also the Lapras to paralyze, and you do have, you know, access to the Talion engine, access to the Radiant Greninja as well, and Frostmoth is pretty good too. So as of right now, I'd put the water box deck in tier 3, probably going to be above both of those decks as well. Moving on to Mew. Mew is the top of tier 1.5. I think the deck is still very, very strong right now as people play decks like the Duraludon VMAXs of the world, like the Blissies, to try and counter the Palkia decks. Mew is kind of in a spot where it just beats the decks that are trying to counter the Palkia V-Star variants, which is why Mew is actually in a pretty decent spot right now in the standard format. The Arceus and Talion matchup also is very, very good for the deck. Yes, they do have Roxanne Path, but typically when they do that, you're going to be up sometimes 4, maybe even 5 prizes, so you have plenty of time to, you know, get out of those situations. So that's why I think that the Mew deck has a lot of potential, although the Palkia matchup is relatively rough, and also Path can oftentimes cheese you out of games, which is why I wouldn't put it in tier 1, but I definitely think it's a tier 1.5 deck and has a lot of potential right now. Gengar Mew here, it's a tier 3 deck. It just is kind of weak right now because you don't one-shot a lot of things. Also, like, yes, you do hit 280 with a choice belt, but things like the Palkias are playing Tool Jammer or sometimes even Big Charm. The Arceus and Talions are often, are always playing 1 to 2 Charm as well. So you're never really able to hit the 200, and then, you know, you're just really not able to hit like the knockouts that you would like to hit that you used to be able to hit. So unfortunately, the deck has kind of fallen off in favor. Yes, it did okay at the Melbourne Regional Championships, but I think it's just kind of relatively weak right now. It's just a VMAX that can't even, you know, like one-shot a lot of Pokemon, which at that point, why are you even, you know, like considering, you know, like to play it? So I think it's okay, though. It just takes a little bit too much to set up. I think it's almost just like a worse I think that it's a worse Ice Rider, simply because, yes, it can hit that perfect 280 number, but you need so much more to do that. So as of right now, I think it's a tier 3 deck. It's okay. I definitely have tried it out, and it's fun. But I would say that this is a deck that I wouldn't really recommend as of right now. But maybe, as you know, maybe if Mew like starts to become super popular again, then maybe Gengar has potential to creep its way back into the standard format. Arceus Gyarados. Arceus Gyarados is a tier 2 deck, relatively strong. You have the Jolteon as well. You have the memory capsule to put on this as well, to be able to use your Get Angry attack. So that's really, really good. The deck is very inconsistent, though, at times, because it plays the Babero engine, it plays the Arceuses, it plays the Gyarados, and it plays the Jolteon. So you're playing a bunch of stage 1s, which causes a lot of consistency issues with the deck. But when the deck sets up, I think it is relatively strong and has a lot of potential in the standard format. It's just that it's super, super clunky, but its matchup spread is there. The matchup spread is there. It's just really clunky, and oftentimes you're not, you know, able to beat matchups that you probably should, simply because you're just, you know, like stumbling a lot. Going into Ice Rider, Calyrex, and Talion here. This is a deck that I think is very, very good. I think it's in tier 1.5. I'm going to include the Palkia V-Star, you know, in this deck as well. Typically, this deck plays a 1-1 or 2-2 lineup Palkia V-Star. I think this deck's fantastic. I think this deck is the deck that hits the perfect numbers in the standard metagame. It hits 280, and then with a Leon, it hits for 310, which is able to knock out pretty much any relevant Pokemon currently in the standard format, which is why I think Ice Rider is really, really good. Issue is it does struggle with consistency. Sometimes it can get, I would say its matchup spread goes down 5 to 10% in almost every single match when you go second. So that's kind of an issue sometimes as well. So I think that the deck, yes, is strong, very, very good, but I wouldn't put it in tier 1 just yet because it kind of is reliant on going first a little bit too much of the time for my liking. But it is a deck that if you, you know, like really start to run hot with it, you could go very, very far with the deck. So we got the Ice Rider Calyrex and Talion with the 1-1 or 2-2 Palkia. It's kind of like the preference, whichever one you want to play. I think it's a tier 1.5 deck. Very good. We got the Inteleon Healing Box top of tier 3 deck. It's just, I think it gets you know, like overwhelmed by a lot of decks right now. It struggles to Roxanne at times. It can break the Sharo Loop, and also just doing 100 and, you know, like 20 or 40 is not really the most powerful right now in the standard format. And also as decks like the Ice Riders come back that can just do so much damage, as you know, things like the Dialgas and the Mews are still popular. Those are all matchups that are very, very poor for the deck. So as of right now, it's at the top of tier 3, relatively okay, but just I think gets overpowered by a lot of decks right now in the standard format. Jolteon, don't play this. I don't even think it beats the Palkia variants. Loses to things like Manaphy as well, which I think Manaphy was kind of the nail in the coffin for this card. Now things like Rabbit Urshifu could survive the Manaphy simply because you had things you like your quick shootings and your Yoga Loops to be able to, you know, kind of get around the Manaphy, but this deck doesn't necessarily have all that. It does have quick shooting, but doesn't have the Yoga Loop. Also can struggle with consistency and just kind of gets overwhelmed by so many decks right now in the standard format. You got the Ice Rider that can hit 300 with something like the Leon. You got the Dialga that can, you know, just one-shot it super quickly. Mew is now playing things like Pumpkaboo, so the deck is kind of just like a dumpster fire, unfortunately, as of right now, but maybe the deck is going to be able to come back at some point when the metagame's right for it. Leafeon and Talion, kind of the same way, just overpowered. Also, Arceus Lucario as well. I think it's just kind of, you know, like overpowered right now in the standard format. It is an Arceus deck, so it almost goes up here simply, you know, because the Arceus decks are so powerful right now. So as of right now, we have the at the bottom tier. We got Lunatone Solrock. I think Lunatone Solrock's a little bit better than people think. I think it's at the top of tier 2, maybe to the bottom of, or I think it's top of tier 3, maybe to the bottom of tier 2 as of right now. I think we'll put it bottom of tier 2 ahead a couple of these decks. It is very, very strong. It's just the problem is the Arceus and Talion matchup is kind of what kills the deck. If this deck did not exist, Lunatone might be at the top of tier 2, maybe even up to tier 1.5, but this is the issue. The matchup's just absolutely horrible. And the deck can oftentimes struggle to path the Peak, Roxanne path. There just are things that really, really hurts the deck's viability right now. So that's why it's at tier 2. I think it's actually probably better than a lot of these decks here. I think I'm going to put it at the middle of tier 2. Still has some issues, but it's a lot better than people think. I know it's kind of a meme in the community. People like to make fun of the deck, but the deck is legitimately like fine. I just think it's slightly worse than, you know, like a lot of these other decks. So, all right. Mad Party is just a worse Lunatone Solrock. It pretty much is just a, you know, like one prize attacker that, you know, like can one-shot things, except it can only hit on turn 2 for, you know, gigantic numbers, as opposed to turn 1 with something like the Lunatone. It's just also more inconsistent as well. So that's where I have it at that tier 3. It's just a little bit too slow right now, where you just have to focus on, you like setting up like all your Poltegeist, which means that you're probably not going to be doing tons of damage on turn 1 with something like a Bunnelby or something like a Ditto as well. So I think the deck's okay. It did gain some things like the Trekking Shoes and the Ditto, but as of right now, I don't think its time is just yet in the format. So we currently have it at tier 3. Magikarp, don't play this. The deck is just way too inconsistent. It is a fun deck. It's one of the most fun decks to play in the standard format, but if you're trying to do well, I think that the time for it is not now. It's just too inconsistent. Maybe we get some card that helps it out, really, you know, helps make it a more viable deck. But as of right now, I just have it at that don't play this level. Arceus Malamar is an interesting deck. I'd probably put it at the bottom of tier 2. Yes, it's good. Yes, it has Jolteon, but Jolteon isn't as strong as it used to be, as there's a lot of decks that are playing Tool Scrapper and just decks in general that can just use their boss's orders to knock it out. You did hit weakness on Mew, which is good, but even Mew is not necessarily a great matchup just because they can one-shot your Malamar, and then you're put in a situation where you're just using your Trini Nova, which is relatively weak because your entire goal is to use your Malamar VMAX as Max Jammer. It's still good for sure. I think I'd probably put it ahead of most of these decks here. Still solid deck for sure. Mewtwo Shadow Rider, I think it's a tier 2 deck. I think it has a lot of potential. The Palkia matchup is a major issue, but the rest of the matchups are relatively okay. It's good, just hits, you know, like tons of damage, you know, like relatively quickly. I've been personally playing some games with it, and I think it's a little bit better than people think. I think it has a lot of, I think, like potential. And if, you know, like Palkia starts to lose some like popularity, then it could go way up. Also, I think it is a deck that is a little bit too reliant on going first, because if it goes first, it actually can beat pretty much anything in the format. It's a lot better than people think, but as of right now, I would say that it relies a little bit too much on going first, but I still think it's okay. Mewtwo Solrock, I think, is just worse than Shadow Rider. I'll put at the top of tier 3. Pretty much it's pretty much like the worst version almost in like every single way. Yes, you do have a one prize attacker, but the Shadow Rider you know, it just, you know, like provides a big you know, like HP Pokemon. It also provides a lot of consistency as well, where the Lunatone Solrock deck doesn't have as much consistency, which is kind of an issue. So I just think the consistency makes this deck a lot better. Mewtwo V Union Stall, the dreaded Mewtwo V Union Stall. It is a good deck. It's very, very good. I would say it's at the top of tier 2. The problem is that it is a deck that is very easily teched for. If people play things like Choice Belts, if they play things like Tool Scrappers, Quick Shooting, and Talions as well, there's a lot of techs that really, really hurt this deck, as things like the Ice Rider have gained a lot of popularity recently. The deck has gone from a arguably tier 1.5 deck to the top of tier 2, but I would say that the deck is very easily techable, and people are actively playing cards that just, you know, like hurt the deck. You know, like we got the Arceus and Talion players playing Quick Shooting, Tool Scrapper, and also Choice Belt, which is kind of, you know, like the trifecta of doom for the Mewtwo deck. Those are all 3 cards that they do not want to see. So as of right now, I think that the Mewtwo V Union deck is in that tier 2 range. Maybe when people start to cut the text, then the card will become a little bit more viable. Actually, I don't think the Mewtwo V Union Arceus V-Star deck is on here. I'd put that at the top of tier 2 as well. I'm sorry that's not actually here, but I would probably put that deck at the top of tier 2. Also is a very, very strong deck, and I think is the better Mewtwo V Union deck as of right now. So anyways, that being said, Dark Box, I just think it's just a worse Radiant Zard deck in every single way. Bottom of tier 3. Rayquaza Charizard, or Rayquaza with the Arceus, I would put in the don't play this as well, just as kind of a worse deck and format that can't just, you know, like one-shot everything. So it like yes, you can one-shot things, but just as a deck, I think right now that struggles to a lot of things that it shouldn't struggle to, has some consistency issues, and it just is kind of outclassed by a lot of decks in the standard format right now. So I'll put it down there. We got Samurott. Samurott's, I think, a better deck than people think. I think it's in the middle of tier 3. It has, you know, some potential. I personally even wouldn't play the Talion. I'd play the Weezing in the deck, but I think it's pretty okay. Radiance, or actually, yeah. So we got the Reshiram here, the Shining Reshiram. I put in the don't play this. It has some potential. It's just a clunky mess, which is why it's in that. I would also put Single Strike in tier 3. Used to be very, very good, but not very good anymore. Stonejourner. Now, Stonejourner is kind of that big question mark, because if people that are playing the Arceus and Talion variants do not play Dunsparce, if I think that the deck could shoot up to here, maybe even here. The problem is that I really don't want to risk that, and as like I wouldn't go into something like the World Championships being like, I'm gonna play this deck and pray that, you know, like they don't play a card. This deck also really struggles to Ice Rider, struggles to Duraludon, and struggles to Mew, which Mew is getting a little bit of popularity again, which is kind of what hurts the deck. But this is a deck that could be here, or it could be here at some point, but as of right now, I think it's kind of sitting in that tier 2 range. I would probably put it in like the middle of tier 2, kind of ahead of Blissey. It could be higher. The problem is that it simply is a deck that is too reliant on the metagame being just right for it. There'll be one day where the deck is great, the next day the deck's completely unplayable. So right there, we got tier 2. Speaking of Ludicolo, tier 3 as well, just as a worse Palkia in every single way for the most part. So it's at tier 3. It's still technically a strong deck. It's just outclassed in every single way, which has kind of killed the deck. Sylveon, Arceus just put it bottom of tier 3. I mean, it's probably just bottom of tier 3. It's just a very, very mid deck. It doesn't really have anything special going for it, except for having the versatility that it has, but the versatility that it has doesn't really even give it a lot of, I would say, strong matchups. It's just an okay deck at 2 shots, mostly everything in the format. Yes, it can hit weakness versus some things, but it's just a relatively mediocre deck. Tapu Koko, with the Arceus V-Star most recently did well in the Shuffle Squad Tourney of Champions. Travis Beckwith got top 4 with the deck, and I think the deck's a lot better than people think. It does pretty well versus Palkia. You have the Hisuian Decidueye. For the Arceus variants, you also hit with Tapu Koko no weakness on Flying Pikachu, because actually Tapu Koko has a fighting weakness and not a lightning weakness. So there are a couple things that makes this deck a little bit more viable than people think. I think I'm going to put it ahead of a lot of these decks. I think it has a lot of potential in the format right now, and the matchup spread is actually relatively strong. We got Togekiss. I'll put it in probably the don't play this. It's just really inconsistent. Abhishek Urshifu, tier 2 deck. It kind of has been a tier 2 deck for quite some time. Yes, it can do well in some tournaments. Rapid Flow is very, very good, but I just don't think the metagame is right for it just yet. Maybe if everyone continues to cut their Dunsparces, maybe if Mew goes back down in popularity and things like Duraludon, it could go back up. But as of right now, I think it's just a solid tier 2 deck. Put it at probably like the bottom half of the tier 2. Vigavolt and Talion, just going to put it here. All these aren't in like exact order, but like the majority of these I think are like in pretty good order. But I think it's a top of tier 3 deck. We saw 2 get top 32 at the North American International Championship, but I don't think they played the Drizzile. I think it was just like straight Vikavolt with like Moltres and Zapdoses and stuff like that. So as of right now, it's top of tier 3. It's okay. We got Leonzard. I'd put in don't play this, just too slow. Weezing and Talion, just too slow and just weak in general. Zacian as well, and Zoroark box to round out. It's okay. I'd probably put it bottom of tier 3. But yeah, so this is going to be my tier list as of right now. These are exact. I think that Palkia is the best deck. The Arceus and Talion variants are going to be at that tier 1 range. Then we also got Mew at, I think, the 3rd best deck. We got the Arceus Duraludon and Ice Rider. Kind of could be 4 and 5. This could be flipped. This could be flipped. There are some things I think could be flipped a little bit there. But then these are going to be also my tier 2s. We got the top of tier 2, Mewtwo V Union, Flying Pikachu, Tapu Koko, Stonejourner, Radiant, Zard box. And we're at the top of tier 3, Mewtwo, Lunatone, Vikavolt, and then that is the don't play. Anyways, that's going to be it for today. That is my Pokemon TCG 2022 World Championship tier list here. Got a ton of decks here. This is just, you know, my personal opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you think that like my tier list is good, and like let me know if there's like something that you think should be changed. But with that being said, thanks for the support as always. I appreciate it. This is SmartTCG, and I will speak with you again soon. Peace out. If you're looking to improve your gameplay, if you always thought that you had the potential to be a fantastic player, well, I can help you reach those goals. I do offer coaching on Metafy right now. The link will be in the description. You can use code SmartTCG for 15% off on your very first session. I have my training packages here. I also have my singular sessions. If you're someone who just, you know, kind of wants to figure out exactly what coaching is and how it can help you be successful, I do offer my free consultation as well. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this message. Have a fantastic day. This is SmartTCG, and I'll speak with you again soon. Peace out.